Hi, welcome back to the Colorblind Architect Podcast. I'm your host, David, and today I am going to change things up a little bit. As you can see, for one thing, I'm not in my normal studio. Of course, I don't have any studio. Remember, I'm doing this video for maybe 2 viewers? Yeah, whatever. I don't know how many people actually watch this, and I don't really care. I just like sharing my thoughts and venting my frustrations out on the world. But today I'm actually going to change things up a little bit. I'm going to do something a little bit more focused on architecture, as of course I am an architect. What's interesting about getting riled up in the world of politics so much is it can actually be quite distracting. Now, I don't let it get in the way of my work, but it is something that can be distracting. And one thing that I wanted to talk about was the nature of how a lot of professionals sometimes get caught up in architecture, in political beliefs that can actually be counterproductive. Probably the biggest example I could give is architecture is frequently used by, let's just say, political leaders with less than virtuous goals in mind. Take, for example, of course, everybody's favorite political figure to criticize, Adolf Hitler. And of course, with good reason. I mean, he was very evil. But when you actually look at the architecture, his aim in architecture was to present a neoclassical architectural vision upon Germany. That is a very common tactic of a lot of political leaders. They'll aim to choose a particular style, a particular motif that they're trying to push. And not sure it necessarily matters. It doesn't necessarily mean anything other than the fact that in Adolf Hitler's case, he just preferred neoclassical architecture. Other political leaders have demanded other things. You could look at the case of Romania. Romania is a very interesting place when you look at the history. In architecture, there's some absolutely stunning and beautiful examples of architecture throughout the history of Romania. The Romanian people are very creative people. They come up with some really cool designs. And towards the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, a lot of the architecture was called Neo-Romanesque or Neo-Romanian. And it was kind of like a crossover between neoclassical architecture and traditional Romanian forms. Romanian architecture is kind of an interesting grab bag of a mix between, obviously the Roman Empire, the Latin-based, which forms a large part of the ethnic majority there in Romania, hence the name Romania, right? But then, of course, because they're surrounded by other ethnic groups in other countries, there's a lot of influences from the Hungarians, the Bulgarians, the Ukrainians, and also significant amount of influence from the Turks. So you look at all that mixture, and it kind of mixes together and creates this really beautiful form. And then in comes the communists. The communists, under Nicolai Ceaucescu, they went about on a rampage of destroying old buildings. they did so in the name of what they called the Program of Modernization, or Program de Modernizatia. I don't know how to pronounce it. I know some Romanian, but not much. So the point is, it devastated the city of Bucharest in terms of its architectural heritage. There were a lot of the old Orthodox churches that were destroyed, a lot of really great villas that were destroyed. And what they put up in its place were a bunch of these, usually about 12-story concrete apartment blocks. They were prisons for people, essentially. You go to Bucharest to this day, and you can see these ugly buildings that were built in the name of modernization. And whether or not it was the right choice depends on your perspective, but in my view, anytime a government comes in and says, hey, we're going to take your house, we're going to destroy it, and put up an apartment building in its place, but don't worry, we'll give you an apartment. Well, wait, I used to have a villa with a yard and a garden. How is this better? Well, you see, you're too stupid to realize. See, you, the plebes, you, the lowly peasant, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what's right for you. And, well, we're here to help. We're the government. We're here to help. I seem to remember something famously said by Ronald Reagan, who said something very similar. He said, anytime somebody comes, hey, I'm from the government, I'm here to help, be afraid. Be very afraid. So, why do I bring this up? Outside of the fact that if you really want an interesting book to look at on this subject, it's an excellent book called The Razing of Romania's Past. Razing as in R-A-Z-I-N-G, as in to bulldoze or demolish. And it is a fantastic book because it catalogs a lot of the historical buildings that were destroyed during the program of modernization in Romania. The thing that I wanted to bring up about this is that we're entering into a new presidency where Joe Biden has openly said that they want to they want to make zoning a federal thing. He didn't say it in exactly those words, but there is definitely an effort on the part of the left, led by Joe Biden, to eliminate local control over zoning and require a nationwide switch to more density, more apartment blocks, and reducing the amount of single-family homes. Do I need to go further, or is it pretty clear why I'm a bit concerned about this? Now, a lot of people in my profession blindly go along with this because they think, oh, but we need to densify because there's just not enough land, and we have too big of a carbon imprint, and carbon footprint, and we're causing global warming, and this is bad for the environment, and it's also just bad for poor people because they're stuck in apartments, but rich people get to live out in their houses, and blah 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 blah. And you know what? To them, I say, screw you. See, I happen to like my house. I happen to like living on a lot with land that I can garden. Now, do I design apartment buildings? Yes, but I design them for market-based apartment projects. In other words, look, I'm fine. If people want to live in an apartment, that's great. I want to build an apartment building for them. That's wonderful. Should we have the government forcing us to live in apartments? I don't think so. I don't think that's right. We really need, as a people, to say no to this. Do not allow any kind of federalization of zoning policy. This is what the Russians did in the Soviet Union. This is what the Chinese did under the Cultural Revolution. Anytime you amass that much power in a centralized government, it is bad. And people will suffer. People will die. There will be mass mayhem. And it's not going to be good. I understand that people are scared of these boogeymen like global warming, like COVID. I mean, look, they're real things. I'm not gonna sit there and say that there's no such thing as global warming. I mean, after all, this whole entire ski season sucked. And while I don't think it's a direct correlation in terms of the amount of precipitation, there have been way more days in the past month or two above freezing than I ever remember in this valley. So it's a very bizarre set of weather circumstances. Even just in the 13 or 14 years since I've lived here in Utah, I have seen it be a lot less cold. And part of that is the increase in the number of buildings off-gassing heat, creating an urban heat island. Now, does that affect the overall global climate? Maybe. I don't know. Now, is it something that we need government to swoop in and save us from ourselves? Maybe, maybe not. I tend to believe that the less government is actually better for us. But in the end, what I'd really like is for people to be free to choose their architecture. So just to be fair, I'm going to criticize President Trump too. Recently, he wrote an executive order that all new federal buildings had to be in the neoclassical style. I'm opposed to that. As much as I like neoclassical, I mean, don't get me wrong, I like neoclassical style. I just don't think we should be forced to go with it. Now, I understand it's limited to federal buildings, but I don't think most federal buildings are necessarily well served by going neoclassical, unless they're in Washington, D.C., close to the mall. There, I feel kind of like, yeah, that would be the appropriate style. But do I think it should be forced? No, because, like, for example, the East Gallery of the National Art Gallery, that is a very striking departure from neoclassical, in that it is a very brutalist modern design, designed by one of my favorite architects in history, Mr. I.M. Pei, who, although being born in China, in Shanghai, he did become an American citizen, and he was one of the greatest architects in American history, a truly great American architect. And that building is a treasure to our country, not because it's necessarily, not because it follows a particular style, but because it creates and evokes an emotion that's different, that is more suitable for the kind of art that's stored in that building. So I think there needs to be a lot more freedom in architecture to determine what is the right design, what is something that's going to create the right impact, the right feel for a specific building and its function. Going with one particular style is not the way to do that. And so just as much as I'll criticize these local cities around the country that will have architectural design standards that try to pigeonhole the designs into What usually they try to push for is a traditional design narrative or maybe a particular style. One really common example would be, you go to Park City here in Utah, and everything looks like everything looks like timber and log cabin and stuff like that. It's very common at ski resorts for that kind of motif to happen. I'm not a fan of that either. I mean, there great buildings in those instances, yeah, but they shouldn't be dictated by any kind of governing body. Every single building should be able to be unique and wonderful in its own way. And same thing applies for the way we live. Architecture defines the way we live. If we're truly honest with ourselves, do we want to be free? Because if we want to be free, then architecture needs to be free. And so, hopefully, anybody who watches this can write their congressperson and urge them to block any attempts to nationalize zoning or to make any kind of architectural design standards or push for anybody to be forced into apartment-style living. I believe it is a huge, huge danger to our republic if we are separated from land. And this is very much because we need to be free to garden. We need to be free to have goats. Okay? Look, if you want to have a chicken coop, you should be free to have that. It's your life. It's your land. The government shouldn't be telling you that you can't. Now, are there times where this doesn't apply? Yeah, there's some times where if you're doing something that's not obnoxious and it causes harm to others, yeah, that makes sense. There's where the power of the state comes in to regulate the interactions between free peoples. But we need to be really careful anytime those repressions of our freedom are ever enacted. We need to be damn sure that we are as free and open as we possibly can. So hopefully I didn't bore you. This is probably going to be my lowest watched video of all time. But again, remember, I'm doing this not for you. I'm doing this for me. I like to vent my frustrations in verbal form, and it just feels nicer to be able to do it to people who may appreciate it, even if there's only 2 of you out there. And with that, I say, I'm the Colorblind Architect. Peace out.